Hi, I'm Allison Whitmire with Learning in Action, and we're just kicking off a new series in which we're looking at the intersection between emotional intelligence and other domains. And today's blog is on the intersection between emotional intelligence and narrative coaching. I've spent much of the last 7 years training and educating coaches and others in the field of emotional and relational intelligence. So I know a bit about that. I'm also a certified narrative coach. Now, that said, David Drake is the hands down expert in narrative coaching, and I haven't taught narrative coaching. So today is going to give you like my view, and just really my view, of the intersection between emotional or relational intelligence and narrative coaching. Well, let's start by looking at how we define emotional intelligence. Now, many people define emotional intelligence as like this cluster of capacities of empathy, self-reflection, self-regulation, and so on. And we agree those are all capacities in what we might call relational intelligence. And what really matters to us anyway is what drives our ability to be empathetic, to be self-aware, to self-regulate. What is it that undergirds those? So ultimately, we see emotional intelligence as really the ability to recognize that we are all one. And when we're not able to be with each other, respond to each other in an emotionally intelligent, in a relationally intelligent way, it's because there are ways in which we've built up barriers to our own heart. We've built up dividers between the divine that's in me and the divine that's in you. So that's how we think of emotional and relational intelligence. So narrative coaching, at least the way I see it, relates to the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, others, the world. And so much of our lives are really driven by the story we tell ourselves and the way that we relate to our lives and how we feel and what we think and what we do has so much to do with the story we're telling ourselves about ourselves and others and the world in which we live. What's challenging about that is that we're not aware of all the stories we tell ourselves. They're largely hidden. The other challenge is that even if we are aware of the stories we tell, we're often confuse them with reality instead of simply a story we're telling. So part of narrative coaching is working with our stories, uncovering those stories that we tell ourselves that are hidden even to ourselves, and then investigating the veracity of those stories and creating some permeability in those stories so that they're not so merged with reality. So we've talked about what emotional intelligence is. We've talked about what narrative coaching is. Where is the intersection? Well, it goes to how we define emotional intelligence at Learning in Action. We think of emotional intelligence as our ability to be in relationship when it's hard to be in relationship, because those places in which it's really hard to be in relationship point to the ways in which we're divided from our divine. Not just from you, but we're divided from ourselves. So how do we become divided from ourselves? We became divided from ourselves because we are incarnated in this physical form that needs to survive. And we're babies born with brains that are only very primitive and are created to adapt to the environment, the culture, the family that we're in. And so the very first thing we do as babies is learn to survive. And we learn to survive emotionally, psychologically, physically, by shaping ourselves to the environment we're in, not just shaping ourselves metaphorically, but shaping ourselves neurologically to the environment we're in. And we come into this world with a bundle of needs, of course, all kinds of needs for not just physical needs for attention and affection and care and attunement. We need all of those things. And all of our many needs are never perfectly met by even the best of parents. And so we become wounded in a way by those unmet needs. And what we do when we're wounded is we learn to protect ourselves. And in essence, in a way, we kind of learn to build barriers to our heart. So as a baby, as a toddler, as a young child, and maybe even into adulthood, we learn ways to protect ourselves that at the time served us very well. They served us to cope with whatever family system, cultural system, economic, environmental system we were in. The challenge is we take those protective, defensive coping strategies into adulthood in ways we don't know and can't see, and employ them in our adult relationships in ways that don't serve us very well. So underlying all the ways in which we're wounded is a story of the meaning we've made of how we were wounded, what happened, how to cope with it, what I did, what that means, what I didn't do, what that means, what you did, and what that means. We come up with a story of who we are and who you are and how this world is and what I need to do to protect myself. And those stories are made up at an implicit level, meaning we don't often have access to them in an explicit way. They're embedded in our implicit memory. So we have these stories that we tell ourselves about how we need to survive in relationship that we are largely unaware of and no longer serve us, and we bring them into our adulthood.